Hi, and welcome to this Military Family Services video workshop on resume writing. Today, I will review with you some important tips, tricks, and special tips that will help you make your resume shine and increase your chances of getting an interview. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Natalie McClellan, and I am the Employment Education and Training Program Coordinator for Military Family Services Europe. I'm also a professional resume writer. Certified professional resume writer, to be precise. Additionally, I'm a certified resume specialist in military to civilian transitions, the only one in Canada at present. I'm a certified employment strategist, able to advise and consult on all aspects of your employment journey, from choosing a vocation through to applications, interviews, and more. I've won several national awards and nominations for both my resume writing and for my outreach to the military community. I tell you all of this because I want you to understand that resume writing is my passion. I enjoy it, I do it well, and I want to help you do it well too. To write an effective resume, you first need to understand the document's purpose. Where does it fit in the job search process? Anyone have any guesses as to the purposes of your resume? If you said, to get me a job, well, you're wrong, sorry. The resume is just one small part of the process, and its purpose is to get you the interview. Your resume is your first impression. More often than not, the resume plus cover letter is the first thing the employer sees and learns about you. This is your marketing document, and you are selling a product. That product is you. For this reason, a resume must be focused on your target job or industry. Generic resumes don't work. Your resume should not be an exhaustive list of every job you've ever had and every course you've ever taken. Think about what is relevant, what best presents you as the perfect candidate for this job. That's what you want to include. Your resume should be accomplishment focused. Don't include long lists of your assigned tasks. Instead, tell several micro stories describing the ways and the times that you have excelled at your jobs. Again, this is about you marketing you. You need to sell. Now consider, who are you selling to? To write successfully, you need to know your audience, and your resume has 3 potential audiences. Depending on the organization you're applying to, its size, and its resources, you may encounter only one of these audience groups, or your application may go through all 3. So who are these audiences? I think of them as the gatekeepers, the hiring managers, and computer software. Let's start with the gatekeepers. This is the first line of review. They are the admin assistants, human resource clerks, interns, anyone who could be tasked with reviewing resumes to determine what's worth handing over to the boss. I've been in this role several times early in my career. I was a program coordinator with no HR experience, but was assigned with another colleague to review the stack of 70+ resumes we'd received for one small position, and to narrow it down to no more than 20 documents to pass on to my executive director. The important thing to remember about gatekeepers is they may know little or nothing about the job. They've been handed the job description, and that's all they can compare your resume to. They are not experts in your field. They're working on a deadline. They probably have limited time, limited interest, and quite possibly a limited understanding of the subject matter. A resume that will appeal to them is in an easy-to-read format. It's quick to scan, and it has keywords that are easy to find. Next, if your resume clears the gatekeepers, it goes on to the hiring managers. These may be human resources staff, senior management, executive directors, basically the ones who are likely to interview you and make the decision on whether to hire you. They're looking at your resume to find items that make you stand out. What makes you unique? They want to see a focus on accomplishments and results. They'll be spending more time reviewing each resume, so your writing style and your presentation are important, as are quantifiable results. And finally, we need to talk about computer systems. Applicant tracking systems, or ATS as they've been called, have changed the application and resume screening process, particularly in mid-size and large companies. Applicant tracking systems scan the information in the resume submitted, categorizing it into fields such as work experience, education, contact data, and more. The system then analyzes the extracted information using criteria relevant to the position to be filled, such as the number of years of experience or particular skills. Then, it assigns each resume a score, giving the candidate a ranking compared to other applicants, so recruiters and hiring managers can identify candidates who are the best fit for the job. ATS is software, not a thinking person. It doesn't have the ability to interpret information. If a job requirement is 3 years teaching experience, and you've left dates off your resume because you want to hide employment gaps, the software can't assign a length of time to your experience, and so you will not be screened in. ATS also can't read graphics or information that you've placed in headers or footers. If you do use graphics to represent information in your resume, make sure that information also appears in the text. Computer systems rely on you to use the keywords that can be found in the job posting and to organize your resume consistently so they can categorize it. Approximately 1/4 to 1/3 of companies are known to use some form of ATS software. The larger the company, the more likely it is that you'll be dealing with ATS. I mentioned keywords. So what are keywords anyway? Resume keywords are words or phrases that describe specific job requirements. They're the abilities, skills, expertise, and values that the recruiter is looking for in a candidate, and that they have programmed their ATS to look for in your document in order to give your resume a ranking. Keywords may be job-related skills, for example, marketing, customer engagement, or online outreach. They may be a specific educational requirement, like a Bachelor of Commerce or an MBA. Or they could be required technical knowledge, for example, use of Photoshop or Illustrator. They may also be the action verbs that you're using to describe what you have done. Words like managed, developed, planned, or presented. If you're qualified for the job you're applying for, there's a good chance many of the keywords are already in your resume. But many still might not be enough, especially for ATS. Look closely at a job posting. See what they're looking for that you may not have mentioned in your resume. If you have lots of experience using Photoshop but didn't mention it, make sure it's in there. If they ask for management experience, use the word manage, not just its synonyms. You don't have to repeat it excessively, but you do want to use it. Here's an example of a job description that I've taken from Indeed. I've gone through with the yellow highlighter and picked out what I think are probably important keywords. It's never possible to get inside the hiring manager's mind and know exactly what they've programmed the ATS with. But you have to make your best guess. What looks important? What is it they really want? Those items I've highlighted in blue are just words and phrases that probably wouldn't be a bad idea to mention as well, even though they don't necessarily rank as high as the keywords. Our next step is to start filling in the various sections of your resume. A standard resume will include your contact details, some form of opening statement or profile, your work experience, and your education. Most will also include one or more optional sections, like volunteer work, awards, certifications, affiliations, or others. Your resume should start with your contact details. Start with your name, and then include your location, a phone number, and an email address where you can be reached. 2 phone numbers are fine if needed, but don't list more than 2. You want to keep it simple. It's also important to not use your work phone number or email address. Even if your current employer is fine with it, it just looks unprofessional. Your potential new employer immediately sees you using company assets for personal gain, not a great first impression. One very important point to remember about your contact information is to not include overly personal info. You need to list your location, but city and province is fine. Your full street address is not required. Also, do not include your date of birth, your marital status, religious affiliations, political affiliations, and other details. Employers are not allowed to consider this information when hiring you, and including it puts them in an awkward position. Next on the resume comes the opening statement, which could be in the form of a personal summary, a profile paragraph, or a bulleted list of top career highlights. Whichever format you choose, keep it brief and focused. You want to use no more than about a quarter of a page to highlight your top qualifications for this job. Even if the rest of the resume stays the same, the opening profile section should absolutely be rewritten for every application in order to closely mirror the job requirements. Writing a compelling opening profile allows you to set the scene for the rest of the resume and influence right away the way that the reader sees you. Here you can see an example of an opening paragraph and skills list I wrote for a client in the insurance industry. It includes a few aspects. First, a title that matches her target job, then a profile paragraph of about 6 lines, and then a skills list, which allowed us to repeat some keywords from the job posting. When writing the paragraph, aim for 5 to 7 lines max. Always be brief. And while the skills list is a great way to enter keywords, a key point to remember is that this strategy only works if those keywords are then backed up by content found later in job descriptions. If you list, as we did, claims assessment in your skill list, but then your work history shows no actual experience with claims assessment, including the word in your list is not going to help. After your opening profile, you'll want to include your professional experience. But before you can write that, you must decide which format to use. Let's look at the 3 most standard options. A chronological resume is one that lists your work history starting with your current or most recent job and followed by your other jobs in reverse chronological order. Dates and job descriptions are included always. This is the most common resume style, and employers and hiring managers like it because it's easy to see what jobs you have held, for how long, and what you did there. A chronological resume works best for job seekers with consistent work histories. No gaps, nothing funny to explain. A functional resume is one that focuses on your skills and experience instead of that chronological work history. So rather than a work experience section, you may have one entitled Skills or Accomplishments, which then lists these skills and accomplishments divided into categories. A functional resume might not include your work history at all, or it may simply provide a list of jobs, often without dates, at the bottom of the resume. Functional resumes were once recommended to people changing careers or people with gaps in their employment history. However, in recent years, surveys of recruiters and hiring managers indicate that this format has perhaps been overused and is not very well trusted. When opening a functional resume, the reader immediately assumes you're trying to hide some deficiency. For this reason, I avoid using functional formats and advise clients to do the same. The combination resume is exactly what it sounds. It's a mix between the chronological resume and the functional one. It can take many forms, depending on which aspects of each style you want to incorporate. Nearly every resume I create these days is some form of combination resume. Many look essentially like a chronological style, but I've simply incorporated some aspects of the combination resume to help highlight a particular client's skills. With this type of resume, you can highlight the skills you have that are relevant to the job you're applying for, as well as provide your chronological work history and the job descriptions that employers place a high value on. Remember that most employers want to see your chronological work history, even if it is not very extensive and even if there are gaps. A combination resume helps you highlight what makes you the best fit for the job while still giving the employer all the information they want. Here's a simple graphic to help you understand what each style might look like on a page. You can see how each of the sections, experience, education, skills, is allocated more or less space depending on the resume style. This sample resume shows a great use of the combination style. We've used an opening profile paragraph, followed by a list of competencies, and then what we called a key skills assessment. Here we highlighted the candidate's military skills and experience in a style that should be easier for a civilian employer to understand. It was only after this that we went into a more concise list and description of the work history. This second example is for a client who's returning to work after 6 years off to take care of her family. We used a standard chronological resume, but listed education before experience, as she had just completed an important designation and we wanted it to be highlighted. We then went directly to her most recent job, even though it ended in 2013. Both her opening profile and her cover letter indicated briefly that she was returning to the workforce after a break, so there was no need to hide it. This client was rehired within 6 weeks by the company she most wanted to work for. Having looked at the 3 standard resume styles, let's now talk about how to write the content to fill out those styles. First and most important is that you want to use action-oriented accomplishment statements. A good way to do this is to start each of your sentences or bullet points with a verb. Managed a team of 5. Supervised daily activities. Use strong action statements to say what was actually done and achieved in a job, not just what you were asked to do or what you were responsible for. Saying managed a team of 5 is much more direct and action-focused than responsibilities included managing a team of 5. And it is less wordy, which is important. A resume should be concise. Catch the reader's attention by wording each bullet in a high-impact fashion. I always try to write according to the following formula. What you did, plus how you did it, plus what the result was. For example, instead of writing, responsibilities included fundraising for community members in need, you want to add more detail. Really fill that sentence out and let the reader understand it. Say something like, raised $2,000 to support community members in need by leading the organization, marketing, and execution of a charity masquerade ball. The reader now has a much better understanding of what it is you did and also sees that your initiative was successful. Who doesn't want to hire someone who's been successful in the past? You'll notice we added numbers to the previous statement. Whenever possible, you want to quantify your statements by adding numbers, statistics, or any other quantifiable information that helps the reader understand the importance of what you've said and what you've done. It's much more powerful to say, delivered 10 training sessions monthly to incoming employees in groups of 5 to 8 persons, rather than to simply say, trained new employees, right? So with the work experience section complete, you now need to add your education to the document. You may put it all in one section, or if you've done quite a bit, divide longer lists into education, training, certifications, or etc. Always list the full name of your course and the school or institution where you studied. Adding dates can be helpful, especially if recent, but they are not required. Remember to only include relevant information here. You may have completed, for example, a diploma in finance before changing your mind and pursuing a career in healthcare. Unless you're applying for a position in healthcare admin, where the finance diploma would be very helpful, it shouldn't be included. Don't make the reader wonder if there's something that you would rather be doing by including education and training that looks like you may have another focus. If you have a university degree, but it's not in the discipline where you're currently working, you of course still want to include it, as many jobs require a degree. But you can leave out the details. You could just say, for example, Bachelor of Science, without specifying a major or including the title of a thesis. And finally, there are numerous optional sections that you could include in your resume. Awards, affiliations, volunteer experience, and so many others. Choose those that you can fill out with impressive details. You're not required to use any of these. But if you've got something interesting, they do help. However, using too many optional sections, filled with outdated or irrelevant information, you're not doing yourself any favors. For an example, you could add an awards section to list internal employee awards, or perhaps for your military medals. Though if you've been out of school for, say, more than 3 years, don't use this section to list academic awards or scholarships, which are no longer relevant to your career. I want to show a few examples of how you can combine education and other sections to neatly finish off your resume. In this example, you can see how we broke a military member's education into 2 sections. First, the degree is listed under education, and then other CAF courses, and only those relevant to the civilian job goals, are listed under training and professional development. We also listed community service work, undated, as the member's volunteer experience was significant and ongoing, but it wasn't structured with clear dates or affiliations with charity organizations. You've seen part of this client's resume already. This client was home with her children for several years, and so we gave extensive detail on the volunteer work that had been keeping her busy. We chose to highlight relevant examples of what she had done. She had also spent several hours in classroom volunteering or playground supervision that were not relevant to her job search, and so those details were left out. And finally, in this example is yet another military member and another example of how you might present military training. As the courses this client took were highly relevant to the job target, but not well understood by the civilian world, we gave short descriptions of the most important ones. Under awards and distinctions, we also included the client's CD, or Canadian Forces Decoration, but this we also described quickly, to ensure that its significance was understood. Before we finish, there are a few other things I would like to mention that just didn't fall neatly into a category. First, use white space to your advantage. Leave a margin of at least 1.5 centimeters on all sides of the paper. I personally recommend 2 centimeters. But also make sure that there is space between each section. 1 line is sufficient, but make sure it's there. Too much space can be bad, as the brain registers this as a pause and it breaks the flow of the document, so do not overuse this space. Second, you want to use common, simple fonts. For example, Calibri, Arial, Tahoma, Cambria. They're easy to read, but also important is they're found on most people's computers. If you use a fancier font, and the end reader doesn't have that installed on their computer is going to substitute it with the closest match, which may be a different size, may be more difficult to read, might not be a match at all. Also, with regard to font, keep the size between 10 and 12 point for primary content. Too small is hard to read, but too large is a bit like shouting at your reader. Headings can and should be larger to stand out, but do not have to be huge. Third is be consistent with all of your choices. If you're using all caps and headings, do it in all of your headings. If bullet points on page 1 are indented 1.5 centimeters, they shouldn't be indented 2.5 centimeters on page 2. Consistency in formatting makes your document so much easier to read. And finally, number 4 is to proofread again and again, and then again. Ask a friend to help. Remember that the resume is your first impression. If your document is filled with typos, the employer is likely to assume any work that you do for them will be of a similar quality, and your resume is going to be binned. Well, we've covered a lot of information here in a relatively short time, and I know that can be overwhelming. Remember, you can always watch again and skip to the parts that you're struggling with. To sum up what we've learned, I hope you take these key points with you. Remember that your resume is a marketing document and not a historical essay. Don't try to say everything. Keep it focused on your job target. Use accomplishment-based statements that don't just say what you were supposed to do or responsible for, but that are written with details to prove you did your job well. And of course, keep the document well organized and easy to read. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have learned a lot, and I wish you the best of luck with your job searches. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me at mfse.employmenteducationtraining@cfmws.com. Goodbye and good luck.